Hello, everybody with us today, and welcome to another episode of Hacks in the Wild by White Hack Labs. My name is David Harris, and I am a partner at White Hack Labs and an attorney in Miami. Today, we will be starting with the legal liability aspect of cybersecurity, the resurgence of data breach class actions. Data breach class actions are again on the rise, with a recent report confirming what many cybersecurity practitioners have seen firsthand over the last 2 years. The findings also reaffirm long-standing best practices. Preparation mitigates costs and improves defenses when victim organizations are required to defend a class action or regulatory proceeding. The report shows that 2,040 data breach class actions were filed in 2023, nearly 3 times the number filed in 2022. Key takeaways from the report are: number one, invest. Companies are wise to continue to invest in cybersecurity. This includes not only developing a robust cybersecurity program to guard the organization, but also a well-designed incident detection and response program, including a playbook that will help the organization identify, investigate, and respond promptly to a suspected cybersecurity incident. Multiple industry reports, as well as anecdotal evidence, have shown that organizations with an incident response playbook not only mitigate the cost of a data breach, but also have better defenses in any litigation or regulatory proceeding. Takeaway number two, what's the harm? Data breach plaintiffs continue to pursue claims in federal court despite the absence of injury and the possibility that the case will be dismissed. Early involvement of outside counsel can help companies assess the relative pros and cons of engaging in early settlement discussions or filing motions with state law claims. Takeaway number three, supply chain risk. Large-scale attacks often engender significant class action litigation, as was the case with the Progress software attack and the 2017 Equifax data breach. These attacks pose issues involving duty to third parties, vendor liability, and proof of causation. Both Progress Software and Equifax, as examples, are major parts of the supply chain across multiple industries. These incidents are proof that all organizations need to thoroughly vet their supply chain, regardless of size or reputation. Organizations can start by prioritizing key vendors and working with counsel to analyze the contracts for those vendors. Organizations should also consider insurance coverage for claims that stem from vendor or other third-party breaches. The bottom line is that investment in cybersecurity preparedness are dollars well spent from a deterrence and litigation perspective. The next topic of the day is Cloudflare's BGP hijack. The free Cloudflare DNS Resolver Service 1.1.1.1 was hit by a pair of simultaneous BGP attacks, showing that BGP is vulnerable even to accidental attacks. Cloudflare's privacy-first public DNS Resolver service was hit by 2 simultaneous BGP issues recently, resulting in an unintentional BGP hijacking incident that highlights ongoing concerns over the security of the 35-year-old Internet routing protocol. The June 27 incident combined a routing hijack with a BGP route leak to effectively bring the service to a halt for users in the affected regions. These issues can happen to any IP address or prefix, but 1.1.1.1 is such a recognizable and historically misappropriated address, it tends to be more prone to accidental hijacks or leaks than other IP resources. The next topic is Disney Slack messages. A hijacker group called No Bulge stole more than a terabyte of Disney's internal Slack messages and files from nearly 10,000 channels in an apparent protest over AI-generated art. A group calling itself No Bulge published a 1.1 terabyte trove of data late last week that it claims is a dump of Disney's internal Slack archives. The data includes every message and file from nearly 10,000 channels, including unreleased projects, code, images, login credentials, and links to internal websites and APIs. The hijackers claim they got access to the data from a Disney insider and named the collaborator. Whether the hijackers actually had inside help remains unconfirmed. The data, which appears to have first been published late last Thursday, was posted on breach forums and later taken down, but it is still live on mirror sites. In addition to the Slack data, No Bulge posted detailed information about the individual who they claim provided the insider access and data. The leak includes medical records and other personally identifying information, plus the contents of the Disney employee's 1Password password manager. Security researchers have long warned about corporate Slack accounts as a treasure trove for attackers if compromised. Disney will probably be targeted a lot more now by opportunistic threat actors. The next topic is RockU 2024 10 billion passwords. The largest password compilation with nearly 10 billion unique passwords was leaked on a popular hacking forum. Researchers discovered what appears to be the largest password compilation with a staggering 10 billion unique plain text passwords. The file with the data titled RockU 2024 was posted on July 4th by a forum user named Obamacare. In its essence, the RockU 2024 leak is a compilation of real-world passwords used by individuals all over the world, revealing that many passwords for threat actors substantially heightens the risk of credential stuffing attacks. Credential stuffing attacks can be severely damaging for users and businesses. For example, a recent wave of attacks targeting Santander, Ticketmaster, Advance Auto Parts, Quote Wizard, and others was a direct result of credential stuffing attacks against the victim's cloud service provider, Snowflake. Threat actors could exploit the RockU 2024 password compilation to conduct brute force attacks and gain unauthorized access to various online accounts used by individuals who employ passwords included in the data set. 3 years ago, Cyber News published a story about RockU 2021 password compilation, which at the time was 8.4 billion passwords. Attackers developed the data set by scouring the internet for data leaks, adding another 1.5 billion passwords between 2021 and 2024, and increasing the data set by 15%. Attackers can utilize the 10 billion strong RockU 2024 compilation to target any system that isn't protected against brute force attacks. This includes everything from online and offline services to internet-facing cameras and industrial hardware. The next topic we're here to discuss now is Shopify third-party app for data breach. The cyber criminal has advertised selling a database stolen from e-commerce giant Shopify. However, the company says the archives did not come from its systems, but rather from a third party. A threat actor with the alias 888 recently took to breach forums to try and sell a database containing roughly 180,000 rows of user information. This information contains people's Shopify IDs, their names, email addresses, mobile phone numbers, total money spent, email subscriptions, and SMS subscriptions as well. On breach forums, The threat actor released a small sample of the stolen data as proof of its legitimacy. They are selling the archive as a one-time sale, meaning multiple purchases were not possible. Interested parties were told to reach out to 888 via DMs and offer a sum of money in Monero. The actor has a long track record of causing leaks, multiple media outlets have confirmed. Just this year alone, 888 leaked sensitive data from Credit Suisse, Assurified, Heineken, and Accenture. Shopify's last data breach was roughly 4 years ago. Now we're here to discuss BGP hijacking. I would like to introduce you to my colleague, a cybersecurity researcher, Cameron Hassan. Welcome, Cameron.
Hey, David, thanks for inviting me.
Cameron will talk more about BGP hijacking and why it happens. You can take over now, Cameron.
All right, thank you. So we know that there is this protocol called BGP, Border Gateway Protocol, that is used to exchange routing information between different networks on the internet. And it is quite essential for functioning of the internet actually, as it helps determine the most efficient path for data to travel from one point to another. However, this protocol is susceptible to hijacking through different kinds of attacks, and the one David you just talked about in the last slide, the recent Cloudflare BGP hijacking, that was actually sub-prefix hijacking, and we can actually understand that using this image right here on this slide. So this image actually illustrates what happened in the recent uh, BGP hijacking attack of on Cloudflare that happened last month. So this is actually what happened. So if we try to understand this image from step number 1 to step number 4, then we can look at the step number 1 and see Cloudflare announces to the internet that it is the legitimate owner of this IP range 1.1.1.0/24. That means Cloudflare has control over all IP addresses from 1.1.1.0 to 1.1.1.255. But then what happens? So there's a malicious actor. So we have named it as FUBAR networks. So FUBAR networks maliciously announces to the internet in the step number 2 that it has also the same IP address range 1.1.1.0/24. But this claim we know is fraudulent because FUBAR network does not legitimately own this range, right? Because we know the legitimate owner is Cloudflare. Cloudflare does uh, own this range. But they don't stop there, the FUBAR networks. What they do next is they go a step further by advertising an even more specific IP address, like 1.1.1.1/32. And in BGP, the routing is dependent on the longest prefix matching algorithm. That means more specific routes are preferred over less specific ones. So therefore, advertising 1.1.1./32 will usually take precedence over advertising 1.1.1.0/24 as a full range, because the 32 one, the IP address with the 32 has more identical bits to the compared to the IP address that the user will be trying to request in the step number 4, that is 1.1.1.1. So as a result, so what happened is the user on the internet who wants to visit the IP address 1.1.1.1, which is supposed to be within Cloudflare's range, will be hijacked and sent to FUBAR networks instead of Cloudflare. Why? Because they have advertised a more specific IP address range than the legit owner, the Cloudflare. So that's what actually resulted in the BGP hijacking. So they were the FUBAR network, the malicious actor, were able to misroute the IP address that the user were trying to fetch, that was 1.1.1.1, to their own IP address range instead of sending it to the legitimate owner range, which was the Cloudflare in this case. So this is actually what happened. I hope I was able to explain it. So that's all. Thanks, David.
Thank you for that, Cameron. So the next topic to discuss today is the new Eldorado ransomware. A new ransomware as a service called Eldorado emerged in March this year and comes with locker variants for VMware, ESXi, and Windows. Most of the hacking victims are located in the US in the areas of real estate, education, healthcare, and manufacturing sectors. Eldorado is a Go-based ransomware that can encrypt both Windows and Linux platforms. It does not rely on previously published ransomware frameworks. The malware uses the ChaCha20 algorithm for encryption and generates a unique 32-byte key and 12-byte nonce for each of the locked files. The keys and nonces are then encrypted using RSA with the optimal asymmetric encryption padding scheme. After the encryption stage, files are appended with the number extension and ransom notes are dropped in the documents and desktop folders. Eldorado also encrypts network shares utilizing the SMB communication protocol to maximize its impact and deletes shadow volume copies on the compromised Windows machines to prevent recovery. The ransomware skips system files as well as files and directories related to system boot and basic functionality to prevent rendering the system unbootable. Finally, it's set to default to self-delete to evade detection and analysis by response teams. The next topic to discuss today is Hardbit Ransomware 4.0. Cybersecurity researchers have shed light on a new version of a ransomware strain called Hardbit 4.0 that comes packaged with new obfuscation techniques to deter analysis efforts. Unlike previous versions, Hardbit Ransomware Group enhanced the version 4.0 with passphrase protection. The passphrase needs to be provided during the runtime in order for the ransomware to be executed properly. Additional obfuscation hinders security researchers from analyzing the malware. What makes the threat group stand out is that it does not operate a data leak site and instead pressures victims to pay up by threatening to conduct additional attacks in the future. And its primary mode of communication occurs over the TOX instant messaging service. The exact initial access vector used to breach target environments is currently not clear, although it's suspected to involve brute forcing RDP and SMB services. The follow-up steps encompass performing credential theft using tools like Mimikatz and NLBrute, and network discovery via utilities such as Advanced Port Scanner, allowing the attackers to laterally move across the network by means of RDP. Having compromised a victim host, the Hardbit ransomware payload is executed and performs a number of steps that reduce the security posture of the host before encrypting victim data. Hardbit is also designed to disable Microsoft Defender antivirus and terminate processes and services to evade potential detection of its activities and inhibit system recovery. It then encrypts files of interest, updates their icons, changes desktop wallpaper, and alters the system's volume label with strings, quote, locked by Hardbit, close quote. According to Palo Alto Network's incident response report, the median time it takes to go from compromise to data exfiltration plummeted from 9 days in 2021 to 2 days last year. Now, in almost half the cases this year, it was just under 24 hours. Now let's talk about 4 types of data breach damages listed here at the top. The first is consumer trust, followed by brand reputation, then lawsuits, and finally legal fines. We have our first question for the audience. Which breach damage type are you most concerned about? For those of you that are watching the live stream, please post your answers in the comments section. And now is the featured topic of the day, CVE 2024-36401. This is a flaw in GeoServer and GeoTools. Cameron will talk more about this vulnerability, and he will walk us through the exploitation on a sample GeoServer installation. You can take over now, Cameron.
All right, cool. So we are discussing CVE 2024-36401, which is a critical security vulnerability recently disclosed in GeoServer. And what's GeoServer? It's an open source server for sharing geospatial data. It basically is a web server that allows you to serve maps and geospatial data from a variety of formats to standard clients such as web browsers or desktop clients, right? And if we talk about the impact, then let me just quickly share my screen over here. Okay, so I hope my screen is visible to everyone. So if I go over on this tab, so if we talk about the impact of the vulnerability that we are discussing, CV 2024-36401, so we can see over here that there are over 50,000 plus active installations of this geo server that we can find on Shodan, including 17,000 plus active installations in the United States alone. So the impact is huge this since it's quite famous and widely adopted by the industry, as we can look over here. And this is the result of just one search engine, Shodan, right? So we could expect more active installations all over the world. I'm not saying that all of these active installations are vulnerable to these to this CV, but I'm pretty sure many of these would be vulnerable because the patch was released just last month. So we have talked about the impact of the vulnerability, right? We have seen it on, we have seen it here, and now it's time to talk about the technical details of this vulnerability, CV 2024-36401. So, so this CV 2024-3601 was identified as a remote code execution flaw, RCE flaw, that enabled attackers to execute arbitrary code on the affected systems. By affected systems, I mean those systems that were hosting the vulnerable instances of your server. So this CVE basically arises from an insecure manner in which the GeoTools library API, utilized by GeoServer, passes attribute names of element types to the common JS path library. So a possible attack vector here could be an attacker sending a malicious request containing a specially crafted element name attribute. So this attribute, when parsed by the vulnerable CommonsJS path library, can be leveraged to execute arbitrary code on the server that is running the vulnerable instance of your server, obviously. So an example payload I can show you over here, if I can open my exploit script. So an example payload in an XML request could look like this. Here we can see we are passing the attribute value as a exact runtime, and then we are using the Java runtime method, and we are passing uh, the command from the script argument. So if we can just trace back this argument over here, then we can see the argument is basically coming from the argument of this function exploit1. And if we can just search over exploit1 where it is being called, so we can see that this is coming from the script argument. So anything we will be passing in the script argument C will be considered as the command to be to be executed on the vulnerable server by exploiting this same vulnerability, CVE 2024-36401. So, okay, so we have, so this exploit script is also actually available on the blog post that the team White Hack Labs recently published on their blog website, ethicalhacking.uk. So if you guys want to try it out, you can actually go ahead and copy this exploit script from there and execute it on your own environment as well. So we have seen the impact. We have talked about the technical details. So by understanding the technical details, it's clear that a successful exploit of CV 2024-36401 can grant an attacker full remote code execution capabilities on the server running GeoServer, or I should say a vulnerable instance of GeoServer. So this could lead to various malicious activities, including system takeovers and whatnot. So to better understand this attack or the exploitation of this vulnerability, we have hosted a local environment that is running a vulnerable version of GeoServer, and it's hosted on localhost 8080. I'm using Docker containers to host this whole vulnerable environment. Here you can see my Docker container is actually running. Okay, so to better understand this attack, what we are going to do is we are going to perform a proof of concept attack. So for this, the lab is already here. So we have the vulnerable environment set up on port 8080. So what we can do is we can use the exploit script that we have created, that we have crafted for this exploitation, and we can use that to actually execute commands on the system as we talked about by exploiting this vulnerability. So for that we can use this command called touch pune. So if you can look over here, so what I'm trying to do, I'm trying to create a file called pune in the temp directory of the server running a vulnerable version of vulnerable instance of GeoServer, right? So and in the target URL, I'm passing localhost port 8080, which we already have seen that is actually hosting the environment that we have just set up, right? So, but before I try to run this command, I need to make sure that this file does not already exist on the server. So just to corroborate that it's our exploit script that was actually exploiting the vulnerability to execute this command on the server. So for that, what we can do is we can just get a bash shell inside the Docker container that is running our Geo server application. So here's the Docker container ID. What I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna use this ID and get a bash shell over here. And now what I can do is I can just list down the items in the temp directory of the server. Okay, so we can see over here that there are a bunch of files that exist in the temp directory, but there is no such file called pune. So now I think we are safe to execute this script and see if we are able to actually exploit the vulnerability on our target, that is port 8080, right? So let's go ahead and execute it. Okay, so the exploit script says the exploitation was successful and it was able to run the command on the server. So let's see, have we created the file or not? All right, so here you can see the file has been created. So it means that we were actually able to run this command by just passing it in the script argument, in this exploit script argument that we have prepared. So now what we can do is we can try to escalate this attack. So I would like to take full control of the system now. So what we can do is we can get a reversal from the system to our terminal. So I've already prepared a command for that as well. So what this is going to do in here, if you look at the command in the script argument here, right here, it says send the reversal to this IP address, and this IP address is supposed to be the attacker's IP address. And in this case, it's my IP address. So what I can do to just confirm it, I can go ahead and see. So here's the IP address that we would like this server, the vulnerable server, to send a reversal to, right? So, but before I run this command, I need to actually set up a netcat listener. So it will be able to catch any reversal that the vulnerable server will be sending it to. So what I can do is we can open a reversal, we can set up a netcat listener on port 4444, just like this. All right, so now we are listening for any reversal. So let's see if we can get it. So I'm just going to go ahead and execute this command. So so the script says the exploitation was successful this time as well. So let's see if we were able to catch any reversal. All right, so here you can see we were able to actually catch a reversal from the Docker container IP. So this is the Docker container IP. And now what we can do is we have the reversal, like, so I can list down all the directories. I can read any file present on the server like this. So this is it. So I can say, who am I? So so it says I am the root. So we have successfully catch a root reversal. So now we have root privilege on the server that is running the vulnerable instance of geo server. Just because we were able to exploit that simple vulnerability in the JS path library, now we have complete system takeover, right? So we can do anything from now on. So the possibilities from now on are endless. We can go ahead and try to disrupt the service. We can go ahead, try to get into other computers or other systems that are connected to the same network that this computer or this server is present in. So that's all. So the game is almost over now for the one who is hosting this vulnerable instance of geo server. So this is how dangerous it could be if you are using actually a vulnerable version of geo server. So anybody could break in, anybody could exploit it, and anybody can get a root reversal as well. So I hope this was helpful. So now what we can do is we have talked about the impact, we talked about the uh, technical details as well. We also went over and perform a proof of concept attack on our local instance just to see how the whole exploitation could happen in real world. How attackers can actually get a reversal, how attackers can take over the entire system just by exploiting this exact vulnerability that we are talking about, CVE-2024-36401. So now it's time to see how they were able to manage to address this vulnerability in their latest versions. So I have open in this tab the patch commit in which they fixed the vulnerability that we were discussing so far, CVE-2024-36401. So here we can see on the original code creates a, on the left hand side, the original code creates a JS path context. Here it is, directly from the document object and namespaces. The document object, here it is, and the namespaces, right? Which is unsafe because this approach exposes the application to the risk of evaluating untrusted XPath expressions. But on the right hand side, what we can see here is the patch code replaces the direct creation of JS path context with with a call to JSPath utils.new safe context method, which encapsulates the creation process and ensures additional safety checks. So what I can do over here, I can just copy this and see what's actually happening in this newly introduced method, new safe context. So I should be expecting it in the same PR, I believe. Okay. Okay. So here it is. Here it is being uh, okay. So this utility method, the new safe context, which is introduced now in this patch commit, is basically involving measures to prevent arbitrary code execution. So whatever we were just able to exploit, so this will make sure that attackers will not be able to do that. All right. So this is how they were actually able to patch the vulnerability in their latest versions. So if you guys don't have the latest version installed, then obviously you guys need to worry about um, and upgrade it to the latest version. So to ensure that no attackers would be able to get a reversal that we just shown to you guys, right? So that's all from my side. If you have any questions, you can ask me. I'll be happy to answer it. David?
Cameron, we have a question from the audience. The question to you is, how long has this vulnerability been exploited in the wild?
Okay, so David, this is the patch commit right over here that we have opened on this tab, right? So in which they were able to address this vulnerability, the RC vulnerability, right, that we were discussing. So this fix was published on 5th of June, right? The same year, 2024 that we are here. So just a month and a half ago. But if we could look at the vulnerable code history, just like this, if I can go over and view this file and go over the commit history of this file and see, let me just go ahead and go to this commit, which happened around 6 years ago. So let's go and browse this directory. Now what we can do is we can go to the exact file on this commit, the 6 years old commit, right? So here you will see that there is the same JS path context initialization. It was happening. It was happening in the same exact way that it was happening in the vulnerable, just like it was happening in the vulnerable code in the patch commit as well, just that we discussed. So here we can see that the vulnerable code has been there for almost 6 years now. Well, I cannot really confirm, David, that how long this vulnerability been exploited in the wild. But the security flaw, the vulnerable code that caused this vulnerability was there for almost 6 years. So we can get an idea from that, I believe. So
Thank you,
I hope that
Cameron. Thank you, Cameron, for demonstrating an example of ethical hacking on a sample GeoServer installation. So what are the benefits of ethical hacking? Here on the screen, we have 4. The first is improved security. Ethical hackers can help organizations identify and address vulnerabilities in their systems and networks. This allows companies to protect their sensitive data and assets. The second benefit is compliance. Ethical hackers can help organizations comply with regulatory requirements and industry standards for data security. Number 3 is cost savings. By proactively identifying and addressing vulnerabilities, organizations can avoid the costly consequences of data breaches and reputational damage. Finally, benefit number 4, to prevent a disaster. Ethical hackers can identify and report vulnerabilities that actual attackers are going to use to infiltrate your system. We now have a second question for the audience. Which cybersecurity benefits listed here are you most interested in? For those of you that are watching the live stream, please post your answers in the comment section. So now let's discuss the benefits of a penetration test report. Penetration tests are used in 4 of the most common compliance frameworks. The first is PCI DSS compliance. What is a PCI penetration test? PCI penetration testing is designed to include assessment of network infrastructure and applications from both outside and inside an organization's network environment. PCI penetration testing must be performed on an organization's complete cardholder data environment, known as CDE, and includes any systems which may impact the security of the CDE. A PCI pen test will help identify the following: unsafe system and network configurations, improper access controls, rogue wireless networks, coding vulnerabilities like XSS and SQL injection, broken authentication and session management, and finally, encryption flaws. The second compliance we will discuss now is SOC 2. SOC is an acronym which stands for System and Organization Controls, and the controls refer to a series of standards that measure how well a given organization regulates and controls its information. Penetration testing and vulnerability scanning are 2 critical elements that can be used to assess the security of a computer system and verify the overall security posture of an organization and put to test the controls designed to protect against cyber attacks. The intention is to identify vulnerabilities and exploit weaknesses to compromise and demonstrate impact on a particular system, a network, or an entire organization. So is penetration testing a requirement for SOC 2? The answer is no. While penetration testing can be valuable for any organization, it is not required to achieve or attain SOC 2 compliance. However, auditors often recommend pen testing assessments to augment the audit. There is also a mention of a pen test for SOC 2 in the criteria, suggesting that it can be one of the methods used to perform the required evaluations. Now, third, let's talk about HIPAA compliance. The Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act, also known as HIPAA, sets rigorous standards to safeguard sensitive patient information in the United States. As cyber threats evolve, simply adhering to standard compliance protocols is no longer sufficient. This is where vulnerability assessments and HIPAA penetration testing become indispensable tools for healthcare organizations. So what is HIPAA penetration testing? HIPAA penetration testing is a specialized form of cybersecurity assessment specifically tailored for the healthcare industry to ensure compliance with HIPAA. This process involves simulating cyber attacks on an organization's digital infrastructure to gain access to E-Fi and identify vulnerabilities that malicious entities could potentially exploit. What sets a HIPAA penetration test apart is its focus on the unique requirements of the healthcare sector. HIPAA mandates the protection of administrative, physical, and technical safeguards. Penetration testing for HIPAA compliance specifically targets these safeguards, ensuring they are robust enough to protect sensitive patient data from unauthorized access and breaches. So again, does HIPAA require penetration testing? The answer again is no. HIPAA does not explicitly require penetration testing, but a pen test is highly recommended as a measure to protect patient data. However, pen testing can support meeting numerous requirements set out by HIPAA and aligns with the NIST recommendation in achieving compliance with this regulation. The last compliance we are here to discuss today is FINRA. FINRA is the U.S. government agency authorized by Congress to protect investors by overseeing 600,000 brokers across the country. FINRA evaluates firms' approaches to cybersecurity risk management through reviews of their controls in areas including technology governance, risk assessment, technical controls, access management, incident response, vendor management, data loss prevention, branch controls, and staff training. So does FINRA require pen testing? No, it does not. FINRA does not have a requirement for penetration testing. However, they highly recommend penetration tests as part of their report on selected cybersecurity practices. This report presents FINRA's observations regarding effective practices that firms have implemented to address select cybersecurity risks while recognizing there is more than one approach to cybersecurity. FINRA details the following practices that have been implemented when conducting penetration testing. These include adopting a risk-based approach to pen testing, thoroughly vetting their testing providers, establishing contractual provisions that carefully prescribe vendor responsibilities, and rigorously managing and responding pen test results. As most financial institutions hold extremely valuable personal information, it is highly recommended that companies conduct annual penetration tests at a minimum. So what is White Hat Labs and what do we do? White Hat Labs is a security testing and evaluation company. We discover security weaknesses before the attackers do. Overall, we give you an X-ray into your organization's security posture. And what are the offensive security services provided by White Hat Labs? We offer two basic services. The first is a penetration test, and the second is a red team engagement. The difference between the two is that a red team engagement contains an element of surprise, while a penetration test does not. Now, if we have any questions from the audience, please submit them now, and I'll try to answer them for you. We don't have any questions for today from the audience, so this concludes today's webinar. We have here on the screen some useful contact information, including our email address for inquiries. Also, you can find useful to our social media pages to read more about us. Thank you so much for being with us today.